The prairie stretched wide and merciless beneath the blazing sun, its tall grasses swaying in waves that seemed endless. The wagon train had moved on hours ago, a thin cloud of dust still lingering on the horizon, proof of their retreating journey westward. And there, amid the trampled earth and discarded scraps of camp, she lay alone. Her name, whispered only in her fading strength, was Eleanor. A settler's daughter, she had crossed rivers and deserts with them, holding on to a dream of land and a new beginning. But when fever struck and her strength dwindled, patience in the company wore thin. She had slowed them down too often, falling behind when others pushed forward. Her protests, her pleas that she only needed a few days of rest, fell on ears hardened by hunger and fear. In the wilderness, compassion was a luxury, and they had none left to give. She remembered the last morning clearly. The wagon master's voice had been cold, his decision final. "You'll only drag us to ruin. Better you rest here than cost us all our lives." There had been no argument that could sway them. Her closest companions avoided her gaze as they packed the camp. Some muttered apologies, others turned their faces away. Then, with the crack of a whip and the creak of wheels, they left her where she sat, clutching her tattered shawl around trembling shoulders. At first, she tried to follow. She stumbled after them across the prairie grass, calling out, but her fever-weakened body betrayed her. Within an hour, the wagons had disappeared from sight, swallowed by the horizon, leaving only silence. A silence broken by the distant cry of a hawk circling above, watching with predatory patience. The first day she clung to hope, certain they would come back. Surely guilt would gnaw at someone's conscience. Surely a friend or kind soul would convince the wagon master to turn around. But as the sun sank and the wind grew sharp, her hope withered. No one returned. She was alone. By the second day, thirst clawed at her throat, and every breath felt like fire. She searched the grasslands for water, stumbling until her knees gave way. Once, she thought she spotted a stream glimmering in the distance, but when she reached it, there was only dry earth and dust. Her lips cracked, her skin burned beneath the merciless sun, and her wound, a jagged scrape along her thigh from when she fell beneath the wheel of a wagon, festered with angry heat. Nights were worse. The cold crept in like death itself, wrapping around her frail body. She curled into herself for warmth, listening to coyotes howl in the distance. Their calls drew closer each night, and their glowing eyes haunted her from the grass. She could almost hear their patience. They would wait until she grew too weak to move, then descend. And still, she thought of her family. A mother's laughter, a younger brother's eager face, dreams of land and a home of her own, all of it now slipping away. Each memory seemed to sting more than comfort. By the third day, Eleanor's strength was nearly gone. She lay in the dirt, her dress torn and muddied, staring at the sky with glassy eyes. Her fingers clawed weakly at the earth as though she could hold onto life itself. The prairie winds moved around her, whispering like voices of ghosts. She no longer had the will to cry out, no longer the strength to beg. The settlers had left her for dead. And death was coming swiftly, stalking her with every passing hour. She closed her eyes, certain the end had arrived, but fate had other plans, though she did not yet know it. The sun rose again, merciless as ever, spilling fire across the plains. Its heat pressed down on Eleanor until every breath was labor. Her lips were cracked open, her tongue swollen and dry as leather. The once pristine white of her bonnet was stained with sweat and dirt, and her skin burned with the fever of thirst and infection. She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her. Her arms trembled beneath her weight, and she collapsed face first into the dust, coughing weakly. A bitter taste filled her mouth, earth and blood from where her lip had split against the ground. She did not even have the strength to wipe it away. All around her stretched the vast emptiness of the prairie. Grasses waved gently in the morning breeze, deceptively beautiful, but offering nothing, no water, no food, no shelter. She thought for a fleeting moment of how the land must look to the settlers who had abandoned her. Wide and promising, but to her, lying broken in the dirt, it was nothing but a grave. Memories came unbidden, fever dream sharp. She saw her mother's hands braiding her hair by firelight, her father's voice urging her westward with promises of fertile soil and a home of their own. She had believed in that dream. She had followed it with hope burning in her chest. And now, abandoned, discarded, it seemed all she had left was a cruel echo of promises never meant to be kept. The wagon master's voice haunted her most. "Better you rest here than cost us all our lives." His words replayed in her mind like a curse. Each time she heard them, she wondered if perhaps they were right, if her weakness truly had doomed her. But another part of her, faint but fierce, whispered that she deserved better than to be thrown aside like refuse. That voice kept her clinging, even as her body begged her to surrender. By midday, Eleanor's senses began to blur. The heat shimmered, turning the horizon into a wavering mirage. She thought she saw water glistening in the distance, sparkling like salvation. Hope surged within her, a final desperate burst. She dragged herself forward on hands and knees, her nails breaking against stones and dry earth. Her breaths came in ragged sobs. The pool drew nearer, so close she could almost taste it, only to vanish as she reached it. Nothing, just more dust and sun. A sob tore from her throat, raw and broken. She collapsed again, this time unable to rise. Tears pricked her eyes, but her body was too dry to shed them. The sky spun above her, blue fading into a haze of white light. She felt as though she were floating, drifting between the earth and some place far beyond. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, low, slinking shapes, coyotes. They lingered just beyond reach, watching, waiting. Their yellow eyes gleamed with hunger, their patience sharpened by instinct. Eleanor shivered weakly. She was prey now, no more than carrion waiting to be claimed. The night fell again, sharp and cold. She curled into herself, her breath shallow, her heartbeat fluttering, like a trapped bird. She thought of prayers she had learned as a child, but could no longer remember the words. Her mind slipped between waking and dreaming, each memory mixing with fever. She saw her brother's face, heard the laughter of children long gone, and imagined herself safe in her mother's arms. Each vision felt so close she reached out for them, only to clutch at emptiness. By the fourth morning, Eleanor had no strength left. The fever had her now, burning through her body like wildfire. Her wound throbbed with infection, every breath rattling shallowly in her chest. She knew she would not see another sunset. Death crouched near, closer than the coyotes, closer than the ghosts of her memory. She could almost welcome it, if only to end the suffering. Her eyes fluttered shut, lashes crusted with dirt. She surrendered to the darkness, letting it take her. But just as the world was slipping away, the earth trembled faintly beneath her cheek. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, approaching. Eleanor forced her eyes open, though the sun blinded her. A shadow loomed against the sky, tall, lean, mounted. Not a settler, not a friend, a stranger. And from the cut of his features, the way he sat the horse with silence and certainty, she knew at once. Apache. Her last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was not of fear, but of wonder. Had death come to her in this shape, or had fate sent a savior? Then the world went black. The prairie was quiet that morning, save for the whisper of the wind through tall grass and the faint shuffle of hooves against the earth. The figure who rode there moved with the land itself, silent, measured, as though he were part of the very wilderness he traveled. His name, known only among his people, was Takoda, a scout of the Apache. The sun marked his skin with bronze, his black hair braided and tied with strips of leather. His eyes were sharp, trained to notice the faintest signs in the earth. A bent stalk of grass, the track of a deer, the distant curl of smoke. For days, he had been ranging far from his band, watching the movements of settlers who cut their heavy ruts across ancestral ground. He did not trust their wagons or their words. They carried disease, hunger, and trouble with them. He had seen enough to know that nothing good followed their trails. That was when he saw her. At first, Dakota thought she was already dead. She lay crumpled in the dust, her dress torn, hair tangled, lips dry and cracked. Buzzards circled high. Above, their wings dark against the burning sky, waiting for her last breath. His horse shied as they drew near, unsettled by the smell of sweat, fever, and decay. Dakota dismounted, his moccasins silent on the earth. He crouched beside the figure, studying her as a hunter might study fallen prey. She was pale, too thin, her breath rattling faintly, still alive. Barely, he should have left her. She was a settler, a trespasser in his people's land, likely abandoned by her own for reasons he could not know. Her kind had brought suffering, taken land, and spilled blood. His duty was not to them. Yet, something rooted him there. Her hand twitched weakly against the ground, fingers curling as if grasping for life itself. Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with fever. For a brief instant she met his gaze. There was no strength in her to scream, no words to beg. Only a silent, pleading look, fragile as a dying flame. Dakota felt something stir within him. Not pity, not mercy, but recognition. Here was a life balanced on the edge of the spirit world, a soul not yet claimed. To walk away would mean leaving her to the scavengers, to be devoured and forgotten. That was not an honorable death, not even for an enemy. He touched her forehead, feeling the heat of fever. Her skin burned beneath his palm. She was close to death. He had herbs, knowledge, strength enough to bring her back, if he chose. The scout rose and glanced around the horizon. No wagons, no settlers. They had abandoned her. That told him much. Among his people, no one was left behind, unless they had already crossed into the spirit world. To leave the weak was a cruelty he could not understand. Dakota bent once more, slipping his arms beneath her frail body. She was light, far too light, as if the wilderness had already been feeding on her. She stirred faintly at his touch, a broken whisper slipping from her lips, a word he did not know but understood all the same. Help. With a low sound meant to soothe, he lifted her onto his horse, securing her against the saddle. She sagged forward, unconscious again, her head against his chest. For a moment, he studied her face, pale and sunburnt, yet still marked with traces of strength. There was a will inside her. He could sense it, though her body had failed her. Without another thought, Dakota swung into the saddle behind her. The horse shifted, then moved forward at his command, carrying them both away from the open prairie. He did not know yet why he had chosen this path. To bring her to his people was dangerous. To care for her was a burden. But something told him her life was meant for more than to end in the dust. The wind carried them toward the shelter of distant hills, where he kept a small hidden camp. There, beneath the shade of stone and cottonwood, he would test the will of this abandoned woman against the harsh laws of survival, and perhaps, in saving her, he would find the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The journey from the open plains to Dakota's hidden camp was slow and deliberate. He knew every ridge and gully, every place where the land could conceal or betray him. Settlers, soldiers, even rival bands could wander these stretches, and he would not risk being seen carrying a weak, fever-stricken white woman across Apache ground. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness as the horse swayed beneath them. Sometimes she opened her eyes, seeing only fragments, the curve of his jaw, the dark fall of his hair, the endless blue of the sky above. Her fevered mind told her she was dreaming, that this shadow of a man was no more real than the visions of her family that had haunted her in the night. Yet his arms, strong and steady, held her upright, preventing her from slipping into the dust forever. By the time they reached the foothills, the sun had dipped lower, bleeding gold across the horizon. Dakota guided the horse through a narrow ravine where the stone walls rose high on either side. At the end lay a hidden hollow, marked by a stream fed from underground springs and shaded by tall cottonwoods. Few settlers would ever stumble upon it. Here, Dakota had camped many nights, using it as a scout's refuge. He slid from the saddle, lowering Eleanor carefully to the ground. She groaned faintly as her feet touched the earth, too weak to stand. He steadied her with one arm before lifting. Her again, this time in a fireman's carry, and brought her to the small circle of stones where his fire pit lay. She was lighter than any woman he had ever carried, her frame wasted from days without food or water. He laid her gently on a bed of woven grass mats he had fashioned long before, then crouched to study her. The wound on her thigh was red, swollen, and hot to the touch. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale and burning with fever. She would not last the night without aid. Dakota moved with practiced efficiency. He filled a clay bowl with water from the stream and brought it to her lips. At first she resisted, her body too far gone to obey. He tipped the bowl slowly, letting droplets wet her mouth until instinct took over, and she swallowed greedily. She coughed, choking on the water, but when he offered more, she drank again, desperate and shaking. When her thirst was eased, he turned his attention to the wound. From his pouch he drew out bundles of dried herbs, yarrow to cleanse, sage to soothe, willow bark for the fever. He crushed them between stones, mixing them with water until they formed a dark paste. Eleanor stirred faintly as he cut away the torn fabric around her thigh, his movements careful yet firm. She tried to push his hand aside, a weak protest escaping her lips, but he hushed her with a low murmur in his own tongue. "This will save you," he said softly, though he knew she did not understand. He pressed the paste into her wound, binding it with strips of soft deer hide. She hissed in pain, her body arching weakly, but soon the sting gave way to relief as the herbs began their work. The fire was lit next, flames crackling to life as night crept into the hollow. Shadows danced against the stone walls, painting Dakota's figure in flickering light. He set a pot of water to heat, adding more herbs to steep. The bitter steam filled the air, carrying with it the smell of earth and medicine. When it cooled enough, he lifted Eleanor's head and coaxed her to sip. She gagged at the taste but swallowed, too exhausted to resist. At last, when her breathing eased and her body grew still, Dakota sat back on his heels. He watched her for a long while, the lines of his face unreadable. She was not like the settlers he had observed from afar, noisy and careless, trampling the land without respect. Here she was fragile, abandoned, her life dangling by a thread. Why had they left her? He wondered if she had been a burden to them, or if cruelty had been their choice. Whatever the reason, she was his responsibility now. Though he had not spoken, the vow aloud, he felt its weight pressing on him. The coyotes howled in the distance, their cries sharp against the still night. Dakota fed another log to the fire, his hand never straying far from the knife at his belt. He would guard her until dawn, and so the night passed in silence. One woman caught between life and death, and one scout who had chosen, for reasons he did not yet name, to keep her tethered to the living. When Eleanor awoke, it was to the crackle of fire and the faint, earthy scent of herbs drifting through the air. For a moment, she did not know if she was alive or dreaming. The last she remembered was falling into the dust, certain death had claimed her. But here she was, lying on something soft beneath her head, wrapped in warmth not her own. Her eyelids fluttered open. Above her stretched a canopy of leaves, their edges glowing silver in the moonlight. The fire nearby painted the Aitidar hollow in shades of gold and shadow. Across from her, seated in silence, was the man, the Apache. She stiffened instinctively, a sharp pulse of fear shooting through her chest. Tales of savages told around wagon fires rushed back to her, stories of raids, kidnappings, of women never seen again. Yet the man before her did not move toward her, nor did he seem to gloat over her helplessness. He simply sat, cross-legged, eyes fixed on the flames, as though keeping watch. When her body shifted with a weak groan, his gaze flicked to her. Dark eyes, steady and sharp, caught hers. She felt pinned beneath them, her heart racing. He spoke then, low and measured, words she did not understand. The sound of his voice surprised her. Not harsh, not cruel, but steady, like the current of a river. He gestured toward a small clay bowl beside her. Confused, she hesitated until he leaned forward and lifted it gently, offering it to her lips. The liquid inside was bitter, thick with herbs, but her throat was so parched she drank anyway. She coughed, gagging slightly, yet swallowed as he urged her on. When she finished, he eased her back down onto the mat, adjusting the deerhide binding on her thigh with practiced care. His touch was careful, never lingering longer than necessary, yet every movement reminded her of her vulnerability. Why? Her voice cracked, raw from thirst. She tried again, softer this time. Why are you helping me? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly, as though studying her words. Clearly he did not understand. Still, she thought, perhaps he grasped her meaning. His only answer was silence, but in the firelight, she saw something unreadable in his expression. For days time blurred. Eleanor floated between wakefulness and fever dreams. She remembered his hand steadying a cup of water at her lips, his figure moving through shadows to gather firewood, his voice murmuring words in a language foreign to her. She feared him, yes, but she could not deny the truth. He was the reason. She still breathed. At first, she resisted his help. When he pressed the foul-smelling medicine to her lips, she turned her head weakly, muttering protests he could not understand. When he tried to help her sit upright, she flinched, instinctively recoiling. But each time his patience held. He did not strike her, did not abandon her. He waited, and slowly, her resistance faded into weary acceptance. As her strength returned, in small measures, so too did her awareness of the strange bond forming between them. She began to watch him in the quiet moments, the way his hands moved as he worked with herbs, the ease with which he read the land around them. He was a man who belonged to the wilderness in a way she never could, and yet he had chosen to save her when her own people had left her to die. This thought gnawed at her most. The settlers, her own kind. She had begged them not to leave, had cried until her throat was raw, but they had turned their backs. And now, here was the one she had been taught to fear, treating her with more care than those she had trusted. Gratitude warred with dread inside her. She owed him her life, but she did not know at what cost. Would he demand something of her? Was she a captive, saved only to be claimed? Or was she truly a patient under his care, nothing more? At night, when the fire burned low and he kept watch with knife in hand, Eleanor would drift into uneasy sleep caught between two worlds. The world she had known, where settlers and families pressed westward with dreams of land, and this new one, where an Apache scout sat guard over her life. She did not yet know to which world she belonged. By the 7th day in Takoda's camp, Eleanor was able to stand without collapsing. Her wound, though still tender, had begun to knit together under the careful binding of herbs. Each step was unsteady, but it was a victory she hadn't imagined possible when the settlers had left her to die. The air was different here in the hollow, cooler, scented with the stream and wild sage. Yet, despite the calm of the place, unease gnawed at her. She was not free. She lived because of him. And she could not ignore the way his eyes followed her movements, not with cruelty, but with a kind of certainty. Dakota had not spoken much, at least not in words she understood. His language was strange to her, though now and then he gestured to the sky, to the plants, to the fire, naming them in soft syllables. She found herself repeating the sounds, awkward at first, then smoother. He nodded when she did, as though approving her effort. But on the morning her strength returned enough to walk to the stream alone, everything shifted. She knelt to wash her face, the cold water stinging her skin awake. When she straightened, Dakota was there. He had come silently, as always, moving like part of the land itself. He stood with arms folded, watching her. His expression was unreadable, but there was weight in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. He stepped closer and spoke, low and firm. She caught only fragments of the words, yet she understood the gesture. His hand pressed against his chest, then toward her, then back again. A circle binding them together. His meaning was clear enough. Her heart lurched. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I'm not. I can't." He didn't seem angered by her protest. Instead, he repeated the gesture, slower this time, as if to be sure she understood. His voice carried calm finality. "You are mine now." The words chilled her, though she was not certain if she had heard them in his tongue, or simply felt their truth in her bones. Eleanor stumbled back. A step, her bare feet sinking into the soft earth near the water's edge. "I'm not yours, you can't just—" Her voice broke, thin with fear. "You saved me, yes, but that doesn't mean—" Her words fell into the silence between them. He did not retreat. His eyes held hers, dark and unwavering. She saw, no cruelty there, no hunger, but something deeper, something older. Like a vow spoken not to her alone, but to the world itself. Confusion and anger welled inside her. How could she, who had been abandoned by her own, now be claimed by someone she did not even understand? She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she belonged to no one. Yet beneath her fury was another truth, harder to face. Without him, she would already be dead. The settlers had left her. He had carried her, fed her, guarded her through fever and night. What was she to him? A burden, a prize, or something else? Dakota closed the space between them and reached for her hand. His grip was firm but not cruel. He guided her palm against his chest, where his heartbeat thrummed steady and strong. Then he pressed his hand gently to her chest, over her racing heart. The gesture was simple, powerful, a binding. Her breath caught. She wanted to pull away, to refuse. But her body did not obey. His touch was warm, grounding, and for the first time she saw him not as a stranger, not as the enemy settlers had described, but as a man bound to his own code, his own ways. "I am not your prisoner," she whispered fiercely, though her voice shook. His gaze softened, not with mockery, but with something dangerously close to respect. He released her hand and stepped back. Then, with a nod, he spoke a single word in English, rough and accented, but clear enough to strike deep. "Bride." The word hung in the air between them like a stone dropped into still water. Eleanor's knees weakened. She turned away, staring, at the stream to hide the turmoil in her eyes. Anger, gratitude, fear, and something else she could not yet name all churned inside her. She had been left to die. Now she was claimed as bride. And though she swore she would resist, a quiet voice in her heart whispered the most dangerous truth of all. Part of her did not want to. Part 7. Learning to Survive. The days that followed passed in a rhythm Eleanor had never known before. Gone were the rattling wheels of the wagons, the endless dust clouds, the sharp commands of men who thought only of land and speed. Here in the Hollow, life moved differently, measured by sun and shadow, by the flight of birds and the rise of the moon. Dakota wasted no time teaching her. It was not a request, it was survival. The first lesson began with water. He led her down to the stream at dawn, pointing out how the surface rippled where fish darted in the shallows. He crouched low, motioning for her to do the same. She fumbled, her movements clumsy compared to his quiet grace. With quick fingers, he showed her how to weave grass into a makeshift net, then demonstrated how to press it against the stream bed, startling the fish into its trap. She laughed the first time she tried and failed, splashing herself more than catching anything. But by the second morning, she held her first small, wriggling fish in her hands, its silver scales flashing in the wee sunlight. Pride flared within her, sharp and unexpected. For the first time since being abandoned, she felt capable. Dakota's expression did not soften often, but that morning his eyes glinted faintly with approval. Later, he showed her which plants she could eat and which would kill her. She learned the sharp scent of sagebrush, the bitter taste of willow bark, the sweet relief of wild berries hidden among thorny bushes. Her skirts tore, her hands bled, but she gathered food with him, listening, as he spoke their names in his tongue. She repeated the sounds, stumbling over them until they fit her mouth more easily. In the evenings, by firelight, he carved shapes into the dirt, tracks of deer, rabbit, coyote. He tested her, pointing at prints left in the soft soil, raising a brow when she guessed wrong. She grew frustrated, but he only shook his head with quiet patience and drew them again. Slowly, she began to see what he saw, the story written in the earth, the way a bent blade of grass or a broken twig told of life passing through. Eleanor began to shed the helplessness that had clung to her since the wagons abandoned her. She no longer sat idle, waiting for food or water to be placed in her hands. She worked, sweated, stumbled, and learned. And though she sometimes resented his stern way of teaching, she could not deny what grew inside her, a strength she had never thought herself capable of. Yet every lesson came with a reminder of their bond. Dakota did not let her forget. His gestures, his steady gaze, his insistence that she follow his lead, all spoke of the vow he had claimed. Bride. Some days she bristled at it, snapping in English words he could not understand. "I don't belong to you," she whispered one night, clutching her shawl close as he sat across the fire. He only studied her in silence, his eyes dark and knowing, as if he saw past her denial to the truth she dared not voice. For beneath her resistance, something else stirred. Gratitude had blossomed first, fragile as new grass. Then came trust, slow and reluctant. And now, as she worked beside him in the wild, she felt the edges of something warmer, more dangerous. One evening, after a long day of gathering roots and herbs, she stumbled back into camp with her arms full. She tripped, spilling her bundle across the ground. Frustrated, she cursed softly under her breath. Dakota was at her side in an instant, helping her gather the scattered plants. Their hands brushed, and she felt the strength in his touch, the steadiness that had carried her from death's door. Their eyes met briefly, firelight flickering between them. Neither spoke. Yet the silence was thick with something she could not name. That night, lying awake beneath the stars, Eleanor stared up at the endless sky and wondered, was she truly his captive? Or had she begun to choose this life, this bond, without realizing? It was near midday when Eleanor first heard it, the distant groan of wagon wheels. At first she thought it a memory, a cruel echo from her fevered mind. But then came the sharp crack of a whip, the low rumble of voices carried by the wind. She froze where she stood, her hands full of wild onions she had just pulled from the earth. Dakota stiffened beside her, every line of his body alert. His hand went instantly to the knife at his belt, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the sound. In the weeks she had spent with him, Eleanor had come to read his moods, and she saw the tension ripple across his face now. He knew before she did what it meant. The settlers had returned. Her heart lurched painfully in her chest. 1,000 emotions struck at once: relief, dread, longing, and shame. The people who had abandoned her, who had left her to die without a backward glance, were near again. A part of her, desperate and wounded, yearned to run toward them, to hear familiar voices, to believe she still belonged. But another part recoiled, remembering the way their wagon wheels had vanished into the horizon as her pleas were ignored. Dakota crouched low, signaling for her to do the same. They moved through the tall grass until the road came into sight. Eleanor's breath caught as she saw the wagons, 5 of them, creaking and swaying, with oxen plodding slowly in the dust. Riders flanked them, rifles across their saddles, faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. She recognized some of them instantly. The wagon master rode at the front, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed forward. Behind him she spotted a woman she had once shared bread with, a man who had once laughed beside her fire. Familiar faces, all moving forward, as though she had never existed. But then one of the riders at the rear turned his head, scanning the land. His eyes caught on the hollow where she crouched in the grass. He squinted, then suddenly stiffened. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, pulling his horse to a stop. "It's her!" Voices rose at once. The wagons slowed, people spilling out, pointing, shouting. "Eleanor!" someone cried. "She's alive!" Her body trembled, torn between the urge to run forward and the urge to vanish back into the safety of the hollow. Before she could move, Dakota's hand closed firmly around her wrist. His grip was not cruel, but it was unyielding. His eyes met hers, dark and commanding, reminding her without words. She was not alone. The settlers dismounted quickly, rifles glinting in the sun as they gathered. Relief flickered across their faces at first, but just as swiftly it shifted. Confusion, suspicion, and fear as they saw the tall Apache scout standing protectively at Eleanor's side. The wagon master stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Get away from her," he barked, his voice hard. "You Indian, let her go," Dakota said. Nothing. His stance was calm, but his hand hovered near the hilt of his knife. Eleanor's heart pounded. The settlers' voices swirled around her, accusations, demands, shouts of savages and danger. They called her name again, urging her to come back to them. She stared at their faces, searching for warmth, for regret. But all she saw was wariness, their eyes darting between her and Dakota, as though she were tainted simply for standing at his side. A woman stepped forward, one Eleanor had once trusted as a friend. "Come with us," she pleaded. "You don't belong with him. Whatever he's done to you, it's not too late. Come home." The word home cut through her like a blade. Home. She had dreamed of it once. But what kind of home left her to die alone in the dirt? She turned her head slightly, glancing at Dakota. He stood silent as stone, watching, waiting. He did not pull her, did not speak for her. His grip on her wrist loosened, offering her the choice. Her throat tightened. For the first time since being abandoned, she realized the truth. She was no longer the helpless woman they had left behind. She had survived, she had learned, and it was not because of them. The settlers called again, their voices sharp with impatience. Behind her, Dakota remained silent, his presence like the earth itself, steady, unyielding. Eleanor knew she stood between two worlds, and whichever step she took next would bind her to it forever. The prairie seemed to hold its breath. Dust hung in the air, wagon wheels groaned, and all eyes fixed on Eleanor as she stood between the settlers and the Apache scout who had saved her life. Her heart thundered against her ribs, each beat sharp, with the weight of choice. The settlers, her people by birth, her own kind, waited, their faces tight with suspicion. The wagon master's hand gripped his rifle, his eyes narrowing at Dakota with unmasked hostility. Behind him, others whispered, their voices harsh. "She's gone savage. She's not the same. She'll bring danger upon us all." Yet it was Dakota's silence that cut deepest. He did not pull her close, nor did he step away. He gave her the freedom the settlers never had, the freedom to choose. His steady gaze met hers, calm but piercing, and in it she saw something she had never glimpsed in those who had abandoned her. Trust. The wagon master broke the silence first. "Eleanor," he said firmly, as though her name were a command. "You come here now. That Indian has no claim on you. You're one of us, not one of them. Don't let him poison your mind." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. A woman who had once shared a blanket with her on cold nights stepped forward. "We thought you dead," she said, her tone heavy with guilt. "But now that we've found you, you can come back. You can live as you were meant to." Eleanor's lips trembled. For a moment, she swayed, torn between the warmth of familiarity and the cold truth of betrayal. She wanted so desperately to believe their words that she could step back into the wagons and erase the nightmare of being left behind. But when she searched their faces, she saw not love, not remorse, but unease. They feared the Apache standing beside her, and they feared what she might have become after surviving with him. Dakota finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "She is not a thing to be claimed," he said in accented English, each word deliberate. "She has walked with death and chosen life. That is her right." The settlers bristled. One man spat on the ground. "Savage trickery!" he snarled. "He's bewitched her." The wagon master raised his rifle slightly, enough for the sun to glint along its barrel. "Eleanor," he said again, his tone sharper now, "this is your last chance. Come with us, or you'll be left behind once more." The words struck her like a whip, left behind once more. She remembered the cold nights, the circling coyotes, the thirst that had nearly ended her. She remembered lying in the dirt, praying for a miracle, only to see these very wagons disappear over the horizon. And then she remembered Dakota's shadow falling over her, his hand lifting her from death, his quiet patience teaching her to walk, to eat, to live again. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. "When I begged you not to leave me," she said, her voice unsteady but rising with each word, "you turned your backs. You let me die." She looked at the settlers, meeting their stares one by one. "And yet here I stand, not because of you, but in spite of you." The settlers stirred uncomfortably. Some muttered, others shifted their weight. The woman who had spoken before reached out a hand, her face pinched with something between sorrow and fear. "You don't understand. We had no choice. Times were hard. You slowed us down. We thought you wouldn't survive." "I didn't survive because of you," Eleanor said fiercely. "I survived because of him." She turned slightly, her gaze falling on Dakota, who remained silent but resolute. His expression did not waver, though a faint glimmer of pride lit his eyes. The settlers' faces hardened. The wagon master lowered his rifle just enough to spit his final judgment. "Then you've made your choice," he said coldly. "Don't come crawling back when you regret it." He swung onto his horse, signaling the wagons to move. Eleanor stood still, her chest heaving, watching as the wagons creaked forward. Dust rose once more, the same way it had the day they abandoned her. But this time, she did not chase them. She did not plead. She watched until the horizon swallowed them whole, then turned to Dakota. For the first time since the settlers' return, her voice was steady. "I know where I belong." And in that moment, Eleanor understood. Loyalty was not in blood or birth, but in the hand that reached for you when the world turned away. The wagons rolled away, their wheels groaning over the prairie until they vanished into the shimmering horizon. Eleanor stood rooted in place, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of release. For the first time, she did not feel the pull of that life behind her. The echoes of the settlers' voices grew fainter until they were nothing but ghosts carried off by the wind. Silence returned to the grasslands. The only sound was the steady breath of the horse Dakota held at his side and the whisper of wind through the tall prairie grass. He had not spoken since the settlers left. Nor did he reach for her, yet his presence radiated certainty. It was as though he already knew the choice she had made, though she herself was only just now realizing the fullness of it. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes still wet but steady. "They'll never understand," she whispered. "No matter what." I said, "They already saw me as lost." Dakota tilted his head slightly, his gaze soft but unwavering. "You are not lost," he replied. "You have been found." The words, simple as they were, sank into her chest, like the first warmth of spring after a long winter. For so long she had measured her worth by the settlers' approval, by their acceptance or rejection. But in Dakota's eyes, she was not a burden or a mistake. She was someone who had endured, someone who had chosen life. He held out his hand, not commanding, not claiming, but offering. Slowly, Eleanor placed her hand in his, feeling the rough strength of his palm against hers. For the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt truly safe. Not because danger had vanished, but because she was no longer facing it alone. They mounted his horse together, her body fitting against the familiar steadiness of his. The land stretched endless before them, not empty, but alive, full of promise she had once been too weak to see. As they rode back toward the shelter of the canyons where his people dwelled, Eleanor felt a strange sensation stirring in her chest, something between relief and hope. The journey was long, but no longer daunting. The same prairie that had once been her grave now felt like a threshold. The grasses shimmered gold in the light of evening, the sky deepening into hues of purple and rose. She breathed deeply, the air filling her lungs with the taste of freedom. Dakota's voice broke the silence, low and thoughtful. "The old ones say the earth chooses who walks upon it. Perhaps it chose you to walk this path, with me." Eleanor leaned into him, her fingers clutching the folds of his shirt. "Perhaps it did," she murmured. "All I know is I was left to die, and you gave me life again. Whatever lies ahead, I don't want to face it without you." When they reached the Apache camp, she was met not with suspicion, but with quiet curiosity. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts. Warriors observed her with calm, unreadable eyes, and the elders studied her as if searching for the truth of her story in the lines of her face. But Dakota stood beside her, unshaken, his hand at her back. His presence was her shield, his loyalty her proof. In the days that followed, Eleanor began to learn what it meant to belong, not by blood or birthright, but by choice and by heart. She carried water, tended fires, listened to the women's songs, and laughed with children who asked her endless questions about the strange people in the wagons. Slowly, the loneliness that had once hollowed her out began to fade. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky and the first stars blinked awake, Dakota brought her to a quiet ridge overlooking the plains. "You were left for dead," he said softly, "but you live. Not because of them, because of your spirit. Because you chose to rise." Eleanor's eyes glistened. She touched his hand, her voice strong and sure. "And I choose you." The wind carried her words across the plains, a vow not bound by ceremony, but sealed by survival, trust, and love. She had walked the edge of death and returned, not to the life she had once dreamed of, but to one far stronger, born of fire and loss, and nurtured in the shelter of a man who had seen her worth when all others turned away. And so, beneath the vast and endless sky, Eleanor's new beginning took root, not as the abandoned settler girl, but as a woman reborn, the bride of the scout who had saved her soul.